Welcome to the Living in Alignment podcast. My name is Amy Landry. Through a collage of conversations, here we distill mindful living and timeless wisdom within a modern, everyday context. Thank you for being here. Clancy Allen is a birth mentor and birth keeper, wise woman and mother to a spirited 4-year-old boy. Clancy honors the continuum of the childbearing phases from preconception to pregnancy, birth, and motherhood as potent opportunities for personal growth and transformation. After transitioning away from a career as a lawyer to study yoga and kinesiology, it was pregnancy that catalysed Clancy's interest in birth. Her passion is to support women during the childbearing continuum, which was born with her son. She went on to study as a sacred birth doula with Anna Watts, Birthing from Within, and the Radical Birth Keeper School. Clancy holds space for women to recover their inner authority and voice, to remember their innate birthing wisdom and power, and to experience birth as a joyous initiation to mothering. Clancy offers birth mentoring and birth keeping, postnatal mother support, Mothering the Mother ceremonies, and her online course, Yoga for Empowered Birth. Clancy believes that peaceful, primal, biological, loving birth is the revolution our world needs now. So welcome, Clancy. Thank you so much for being here today, my friend. It's really good to see you.
Thank you for having me. It's, such a pleasure. Can't wait.
I would love to dive in, as we always do, with hearing a little bit about your background. I would love you to share your story and any relevant dots that need to be connected, just to share with us how you landed here doing this work specifically.
So I guess my background, my career prior to arriving in the birth space was very different to birth work. I used to be a lawyer, and it's such a masculine profession with so much emphasis on the intellect and just so very different to the world I'm in now with birth. So I found that really unsatisfying for my soul after being in those corporate handcuffs, I suppose, for about 5 or 6 years. And I found yoga was the thing that really supported me to find peace within myself and to be able to actually stay in that career and in that the headiness of that career while I was, I guess, sort of hatching a bit of a plan to escape. So yoga was my anchor, I suppose, during the final years of that career. And I found yoga when I was about 28. So sort of going into that Saturn return phase of life. And there were lots of internal shifts happening for me and lots of realizations happening within myself about the types of ways that I had put academic achievement and intellectual achievement on a pedestal and as some sort of barometer of my worthiness. And all that was starting to unravel. And so yoga was just such a beautiful support for me as I slowly stepped away and made that transition from that career. And I studied yoga teacher trainings, and I'd also had a lot of personal breakthrough and revelations with kinesiology. So I was studying kinesiology, and that same year that I was studying kinesiology, I fell pregnant with my son, Louis, and that was a bit of a surprise. It sort of happened in, the first time after my partner and I had a conversation about calling in a baby, and then we conceived straight away. So yeah, the pregnancy was a really nice year for me. I had loved being pregnant. I was studying something I was really passionate about. That was the kinesiology, and um, I wasn't really working. I was doing a little bit of work here and there. So it was a time of really sinking into my body and just in awe of pregnancy and the magic that was unfolding within me. And I was just discovering how fascinated I was about birth during that pregnancy as well. And I had this inkling during the pregnancy that birth might be something that I would be interested in working in some space. And I guess, yeah, it was definitely in the realm of like the role of a doula that was sort of kept popping up during the pregnancy. But I also thought it probably is just a phase because I'm pregnant and because I'm about to birth that I am really interested in this and fascinated by it. So I'll just wait till I've had my baby and see. And then after he was born, 9 months later, I was still reading birth books and still very much just enthralled with the magic of birth and women's bodies and the mystery of it, and was feeling really called to study and to do a doula training. So yeah, he was, how old was he? I think he was about 14 months old when I took my first birth doula training. So that was sort of how that shift and that transition happened, and how I, came to be in the birth world.
And do you feel that either your birth experience, having Louis, and or the postnatal period was also a really strong catalyst for you to feel really passionate and resonate with this work?
I'm not sure. I feel like no matter how my birth went, I would have still been where I am today, and I still would have gone down this path, because my birth with Louis was very disempowering and didn't go according to my plan, I suppose. So I think sometimes people think, oh, because of that, now you're in birth to try and make a difference. And I think, if the opposite had happened and I'd had this amazing positive experience, I still would have been called to step into the birth space. But I think in my own life, I embody this sort of wounded healer archetype a lot. And so there has been a lot of self-reflection post his birth, and a lot of unraveling and dissecting what did unfold. And just in a nutshell, without going into the details, it was a planned home birth, but still within the system. So in a publicly funded home birth service up in the Northern Territory. And I ended up with a forceps delivery in theatre and having a spinal block just before that, after about a 24-hour birth process that was otherwise, without or very minimal intervention. So it was very disempowering, and I know that I could have birthed him without that intervention, but at that time and the paradigm that I was in and where I was at personally in relationship to birth, I still wasn't taking 100% responsibility for my experience. I still had unconscious beliefs that birthing in captivity or in a setting where some of the responsibility was being held by midwives, in that home birth setting that's still attached to the system, was safer for me than, free birth. And free birth was in my awareness then, but I was yeah, I guess, I was just where I was at then, and now my choice would not be to birth within the system, and I include within that even home birth that is attached to a public hospital system setting, because in a way that's still hospital birth at home, still subject to all the same policies and things. And but I have a lot of compassion for myself with where I was at that time. And I was also still under, I guess, a bit of a spell or an illusion that the experts knew more about my body and birth than I did. And that's just where I was at that time. So, and that's okay. I've learned a lot about myself in what happened to me, even though it was extremely disempowering. And then that did have a big flow-on effect into my postpartum, and that was really tricky for the first year, I would say, just because of the trauma that I was unraveling and looking at. And
and I think, Clancy, from obviously we've had lots of previous chats, but for the listener, for the sake of clarity, and please feel free to correct me if I'm wrong on this, but my understanding from your birth experience is that you actually didn't need to go to hospital. There was nothing wrong with how you were progressing at home, but it was more just the system itself that you had to be transferred because there was no one there available at that time to support you and do what needed to be done.
exactly.
And, even your views that you've just shared would no doubt to many people seem quite rebellious and even polarizing potentially, which is what I love about you and your work. And you mentioned part of your journey as well in inspiring the work that you do. You read a few books and stuff on the way. Can you look back and think that there was, maybe one or two books that really stood out for you that could be potentially useful to anyone listening as well that's going through this process for themselves?
Yes. So one of my all-time favorite books during my own preparation and pregnancy was Birth with Confidence by Rhea Dempsey. And I always recommend that to women, especially women who are planning to birth within the setting of, hospital birth center, or even home birth that's attached to one of those entities, because she talks about needing to be savvy within and make savvy choices within that system to get the birth you want. And the reality is that within the system, I think I read it recently, only 5% of women are having a birth that is entirely free of intervention. So that 95% of women are going to have some form of intervention when they're going into that setting. And that's quite a sobering statistic. But, whether that's, an extreme intervention like a failed induction with the cascade of interventions that leads to the cesarean section, or whether it's, augmentation of birth by rupturing membranes, or cervidil, or just the third stage of birth, which is birthing the placenta. And by default, every woman, unless she is objecting, and probably quite strongly, is going to get a jab of syntocin, which is synthetic oxytocin, to birth her placenta. And that stage is going to be managed. And a lot of women aren't even aware of that as they're stepping into the system. So that is a massive intervention that most women are going to confront in that setting. So 5% of women are having a spontaneous birth without intervention. So it's overwhelmingly likely that will happen in that setting in some way.
It's quite scary and such a intense reality check, and it just goes to show that we as women have a tendency, well, and I suppose men as well, both parents have a tendency to put decisions and the control and the faith and everything in the hands of the care provider. And that in itself is where I'm mindful of my language, but where we kind of first go wrong, you know. And as you mentioned with your own personal experience, those subconscious beliefs or conditions, etc., that can influence us in that intense moment of labor and giving birth. You know, if we don't tend to those and question our own conditioning and paradigm around giving birth, then we're no doubt going to default into making certain decisions, or perhaps I should say not making decisions at all and letting somebody else make them on behalf of us. And yeah, you know, as with what I said before, you know, this can be seemingly for many people quite a rebellious way of thinking, and it's obviously not meant to offend anybody or deny anyone's qualifications or, you know, intentions in general. But I think it's such an important conversation to start having to change the paradigm around the way that women can have the birthing experience. And so for anyone listening, I don't want to make any assumptions here. So you mentioned free birthing. Would you mind sharing a little bit of just clarification around what that looks like, and perhaps maybe even some misconceptions that you might find that arise with that?
Yeah, I guess it's maybe it's a buzzword at the moment, or has become more so, particularly because of COVID and, you know, this new place we find ourselves in where there's been even more restrictions on women birthing and the support that they can have been removed. So I think this alternative option that in the past has been seen as reckless and dangerous and rebellious and crazy has just become a bit more of like a potential option that women are exploring now because of these other restrictions that have come about with COVID. But yeah, free birth, I mean, I don't want to sort of have a strict definition of it, but I guess the way I see it is it's birth at home, unassisted by a medical care provider. So it's really just birth, like normal birth, before birth has suddenly become a medical event, and before birth being a medical event has been normalized, even though, you know, birth in that system as a medical event is not normal, is really not normal. So yeah, it's just birth. You could also call it family birth. So yeah, families just, and women just choosing to stay home and birth in their own environment, in their power as the authority over their experience and their body, and I guess unassisted in the sense that they don't have a midwife there or anyone, you know, trained specifically in medical aspects of birth. They might, you know, have family members around. I guess they might have, some women might choose to have a traditional, authentic midwife or birth keeper who is there more for the emotional support. And I guess that's my role in my work now. But yeah, it's really just birth, like in its purest form, stripped back from, what birth is now overwhelmingly, which is it's a medical event. And that's, you know, we're all sort of programmed and socialized to believe that birth is unsafe. And so many of us, and even myself, hold that narrative within ourselves. It's often imprinted in us from our own birth experience, because a lot of us were birthed in hospitals and potentially with interventions or with drugs. And I don't say that in a way to shame women who have chosen epidurals or, you know, I think in so many ways having an epidural or other types of pain relief in that setting is how it has to be, because you're in a setting that is so antithetical to what birth needs to unfold. You're in a setting where there can be bright lights, there are strangers, there is technology and surveillance, you're being observed, you're being monitored, you've left your home, there's no privacy, not allowed to eat, like you're potentially strapped up to monitors, your movement is restricted,
the noise,
all this stuff is, so far removed from what birth requires and what the hormonal matrix of birth needs to unfold in its optimal, normal state, that, of course, women with all that disrupting the flow of hormones may require epidurals or something to support themselves, because the hormonal matrix has been disturbed and hijacked, and it's going to be more intense when that's happening. So yeah, no shame in that, but I guess getting back to the imprint thing, a lot of us have the imprint in our own system and our own cells that birth or life is inherently unsafe and dangerous, because we may have been pulled out by forceps ourselves, which I was as a baby. So it was interesting that then I recreated that in my own birth experience with my son. So I know there's no doubts that the reason that manifested and that happened, in part, many other reasons and multifactorial reasons going into it, but would have been my own unhealed birth trauma from my own birth at play as well, with all the other things. So there's we are just set up to fail in so many ways. So there is so much unlearning and remembering and coming back to the simplicity of birth and the safety of birth, actually, when it's left alone. But that takes a lot of undoing of all the other stuff that we've been told, and really a lifetime of rules and agreements that we've made about not just birth, but about, as women, like what we need to do to be accepted and get approval and to be loved, and all that stuff can come up in birth, because there is a power dynamic inherent in that system with those experts as authority figures. As women, when we're in a fight or flight response, which is more likely to happen in birth because we're in our mammalian, more primitive brain structures, which is by design and part of the evolutionary regression. But because of that, we can be more inclined to fawn in our stress response, or tend and befriend. So be really agreeable to things that have been posed by experts, even if we'd gone in there with this intention to, say no or advocate for ourselves, or we have this plan or these preferences that we want things natural and we don't want this intervention and that intervention. And it's really easy for all that to just go out the window and to fall victim, I suppose, to the power structure, to our conditioning, to all these factors that can come into play and really derail our births and leave us feeling disappointed. And I think there's so much trauma, sadly, so much birth trauma, because of all this stuff. And the system is really designed to perpetuate, to make women sort of lifelong consumers. Like, it's a system that's based on separation, and it's not set up to support physiological birth.
speaking to the system and the flaws in the system, I think it's worth lightly touching on the fact, or at least, we can speak to Australia at the very least. It's from a financial standpoint, free home births and midwifery care is very rare. And, so it's kind of like if people don't have the private health insurance to go through the private system, which is flawed in itself. And I know plenty of people that have had magnificent experiences. And I know that they're people that were incredibly informed and empowered. And, and I think that that's really reflective of, the work that they've done with themselves. But it's just easy to go through the hospital system because it's cheap or free, and that's just what you do. And I know that I personally couldn't have afforded to, or wouldn't have paid at that time to go through a private midwife. And so it's creating these situations where we almost seemingly don't have choice. And of course we do, but particularly when you're talking about, your first child, there is that vulnerability and those sort of natural concerns, particularly with our partner. And so it's almost a default to go with what's free and accessible and easy, and we know we'll be, air quotes, safe through the medical system. And as you know, Clancy, but for those listening, I did have a home birth, and I know for sure that if I was at hospital, given the somewhat complication that I had with a posterior baby, and he kind of got stuck in the cervix and whatnot, the skills of the midwives totally turned that around, quite literally, pun not intended. But, and if I was in hospital, for sure I would have been told, right, cesarean, you've got no choice. And I do think that I probably, in my depleted state, like I was so exhausted from laboring posterior birth for hours and hours, and the pain, and because of that particular situation, I think I would have gone okay, and I would have probably succumbed and done it. And because I was at home under the care of midwives who knew what to do and who were willing to spend the time to get me out of that pool and do what they needed to do to get him out of that stuck position and shifted and moved and turned, I was blessed to have that natural birth as I had hoped for. And that doesn't mean it didn't have its challenges, but it was such a highlighted example for me that, wow, this is so easily how it happens, that things can go pear-shaped. But it's not really about you. It's about the person that's there to care for you and what they are willing to do or not to do. And, and that comes down to the system and where you are. And it's kind of frightening.
Yeah, like you would have been labelled failure to progress and probably had a cesarean if you didn't have care providers who were skilled in supporting you to get into positions that shifted your baby. So, that is a gift as well, because it can be like midwife roulette. Some midwives know those things and other midwives don't, and some midwives are willing to spend and take the time to try those things and support you to do that, and other midwives aren't. And it potentially, if you'd had midwives who weren't, they could have transferred you, I guess. And you're at the effect of other people. It's there are options and there are choices, and I guess my message now is that birthing outside the system is a valid choice, and it isn't just like for women who are hippies or, reckless. In fact, the women who are choosing this are very informed and making this choice for very well-intentioned reasons to do with safety. So,
and I'm sure you'd agree, Clancy, too. Sometimes our choices are not choices we need to disclose to everybody around us. I was actually quite private about my choice to birth at home because I sense it wouldn't be an enthusiastic response from those immediately around me. And of course, they're all, it's all beautiful and wonderful now, but I knew that I needed to only disclose my choices with people that I knew were totally aligned and that would advocate for that and would be enthusiastic about that. And I don't know if you, on that note, have anything that, well, for those people listening, you know, and if they are planning to have a birth, have a baby now, soon, in the future, or support someone through birth, you know, what would you recommend? Like, what would you think is the first thing that they need to be doing to get to this place where they're really, really empowered and informed, particularly as things go these days?
Yeah, I just want to say before I answer that, that yes, you sort of keeping that decision close to your chest to birth at home with midwives because of the potential or perceived negative reaction that you would have from people. It just, the fear mongering around even choosing to have a home birth with midwives is intense, let alone imagine sharing, I'm choosing to just birth at home and do it myself because I trust myself and I trust that if I felt something was up, or you know, I would be the first person to know that something wasn't right, and if that was the case, I would get the help that I would need. But that would just, you know, like, imagine the backlash from that.
When 95% of people have had some kind of intervention or traumatic birth, you know, to some degree, hasn't gone to plan, like the 5%, that conditioning in people's stories is always going to subconsciously influence their response and the way that they, you know, share their loving guidance and advice from their own personal experience, you know. On that note, little guidance, what would you say for those listening, how to move forward with this information?
I think that, you know, birth is inescapably something that happens in our bodies. And I think because of the way that our culture and our modern society is set up, we are so focused on mental, you know, just we pedestal that over body wisdom and instinct. It's all about the intellect, and there's this real disconnect between, we live sort of like above the shoulders, between the ears. Like there's so much focus up here on that. It's a very masculine way of being. So I think the biggest challenge is trying to reverse that and send and descend your energy back down into your body and to reconnect to that wisdom, to tune in and to listen to your body and to start exploring what the stories are that make up your life, and looking at those prior rites of passage around menstruation and what our relationship to our body is. You know, are we disconnected from it? Have we suppressed our cycles with birth control, which is such a common story? All that is super relevant, and I feel like that's like the starting point, just reestablishing that connection to our bodies. And we've really externalized it so much with this godlike status that we have elevated obstetricians and, you know, even midwives on, that they're all knowing about this area and about our bodies. And I think things like ultrasound further distance us from tuning into the wisdom of our bodies and really attuning to the connection we have with our baby, because we're relying on this technology to see our baby and to get this validation. And it's such a false sense of security. It's like false validation that our baby's okay. So all these things just really reinforce that severance from our body. And so for me, it's about peeling back that stuff and getting back to our body, however that is done for you. And it can be examining stories, examining what's happened in our past, but also just using things like yoga and breath work and being with ourself in silence and stillness.
It's very much an honouring of tradition, in a sense, that tradition of womanhood, and reconnecting with that innate, relationship with ourselves and our bodies.
Yeah, and just opening to the fact that we can communicate with our babies, we can attune our consciousness to theirs, that we can all tap into that. It's just that we're so disconnected from it, and it's just a symptom of the world we live in, I suppose. So for me, that's definitely the starting point, and one of the most important things. And then also starting to look at our entire life history of events and who we are, and especially our really early years, like up to the age of 7, because those life experiences, our relationships in that time within our family unit and our primary caregivers when we were in those younger years, really shape who we are. We make rules and agreements when we're very young about what we need to do to get love, to get approval, to be secure. And a lot of those times, those agreements and rules are totally unconscious. We're still playing them out in our daily behaviors and relationship dynamics, and often they're not helpful. So really starting to explore those things is more important, more powerful, more impactful than doing like courses that teach you how to breathe for birth. I mean, we all know how to breathe. And I think for most women, when they are not disturbed in birth, they will...
It happens.
Yeah. They find their way. They don't need to know this breathing technique that's like counting here and there. And I think for myself, I did calm birth when I was pregnant, and they teach this specific sort of breathing, count to whatever. And I found that so distracting and counterproductive in birth, because part of my brain was still thinking, am I doing this right? Am I like, and like, fuck no, you don't want to be thinking that when you're birthing. You don't want to be thinking about, am I breathing right? Am I applying this formula for breath correctly?
It's putting it back in your head again.
Exactly. Like it's oversimplistic and reducing preparing for birth to like some tick boxes that are superficial. For me, the preparation is all about getting into the psychology of who you are, what's shaped you, what's your relationship to birth, all the family stuff as well. There's so much, but that's all more relevant than the other stuff.
Yeah, I'm in full agreement. I didn't do any courses. I did a breastfeeding one because I knew that postnatal period would be, quite significant. And actually, that brings me to my next question. Would you mind, and I know, I hope there's one day where you never have to say this or do this again, but would you mind for the listener just sharing what it is that you do as a doula? Because some people still today are like, what's a doula? So, or what you're there to do, how you're there to support, because I know that obviously your work entails not only birth, but also the significant and really important postnatal period that often gets not thought about until we're in the thick of that intensity.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah. I walk with women and their partner, if they have a partner, in the prenatal period in a really intentional, focused way that is very honoring of the multi-dimensional aspects of preparation that are needed for this rite of passage. So, yeah, it's about looking at all that psychological stuff. It's about looking at the spirit. It's about balancing that with the intellectual things that you need to know and the physiology of birth. It's about looking at the relationship dynamics of that couple. It's just covering all the bases and supporting them to be ready to be 100% responsible for their birth experience, and to know that, or for the woman to know that only she can do this. She's the one who has to cross the threshold. No one can do it for her. And that she feels powerful enough to just confront that and walk through that challenge and claim her power in that fire, in that initiation, and cross the threshold from maiden to mother in a way that is just so embodied and so in her power. And my goal, I guess, is that even if someone has engaged me to support them at their birth, is that they feel so ready and so confident and so capable that they could get to that day and not need to call on me. That they just have complete faith in being able to do it, and in that knowing, in that deep trust of herself, that she has everything she needs within her. And I think looking back on my early days as a doula, I definitely was going in with a bit of a hero mentality. Like, you know, I was the doula with all the tools and the tricks, and the system was the villain. And, you know, the woman is potentially at the effect of the system, and so the victim. And you've got that classic sort of drama triangle, and that's where I was on that. And I really thought for a long time, for the first couple of years, that I could create change by going into births and being the hero and the savior within that system. And I began to realize that that's just not possible. This is an entire system that is never going to change from that, you know, micro dynamic in one birth experience with a doula there as the hero. I'm using air quotes, like just totally fantasy thinking. And I just, and that's part of the reason, I guess, why I made a decision about a year ago that I wasn't able to provide that typical doula support to women in the system anymore, because there's only so much I can do within that system. And I felt complicit sometimes with that system by being there to support a woman through things that are not okay that happened, and whether they happened through like coercion or bullying or fear-mongering or whatever. I wasn't comfortable anymore being there through that, and really not being able to do much about it, really just having to witness that. And for me, I found that like it's trauma. It's watching, you know, it's secondary trauma again that I just had to draw this boundary around and say no more to, and really trust that I would call in women who could see that the new way is outside the system, and that, that's where I'm at. Like, I'm here for the new way, and that can only happen from outside the system. There was a really great TED talk that I heard a while back about dying systems, and, you know, a lot of the systems that we have within the industrial modern world and this patriarchal structure we live in are it's like perpetuates that death culture type of reality. And there's some people who can stay and work within that system, and there's other people who have to step aside and be a trailblazer and create a new way outside it. And I guess I am really here for that. I'm not here for being, complicit with the abuse and the gaslighting, the infantilizing, and all the crappy things that I've witnessed from within the system as a doula. So I don't resonate so much with the word doula anymore, because I feel like it has sort of become synonymous with supporting births in that setting. And so, I feel more, I guess, aligned and like resonant with calling myself a birth keeper or just birth support.
So ultimately you're impacting those birth scenarios through the work that you're doing with women outside of the scenario, like planting those seeds. And
and in saying that, I do still work from time to time with women who are planning to birth in the system, and I offer mentoring, and it's just that I don't attend the birth, but there's still women who choose to do that mentoring with me and do the work with me in that way, and that's totally fine. I accept that that is still the predominant choice that women are making, to still birth within that system, and that's okay. I honour that that's where people are. But in terms of walking with people and attending births, I'm supporting women who are choosing that, family birth, choosing just birth.
I love that. It's just so simple. It's just birth without the bells and
choosing
whistles.
Ordinary birth that's not medicalized.
Yes. It's perfect. So let's I'd love to throw a few little fun specific questions at you. So we'll just shift the focus a little bit to more you as Clancy. What does studentship look like to you in life right now? Not necessarily formally, but what are you studying and digging deeper into?
I guess right now I am taking a bit of a deep dive with self-mastery tools over my own life and being responsible in my own life, seeing life as an ally, and how every situation is for me and there's a gift in everything. Really shifting or noticing, having awareness around when I am on that drama triangle that I spoke to about in relation to the doula hero dynamic. Because, most of us, most of the time, are somewhere on that triangle. So just being really conscious of that in my relationships and noticing that. Right now I'm always studying and doing some sort of course. I'm engaged in birth story listening right now, which is offering a specific birth story listening process to women who've had a difficult, challenging, traumatic birth experience, and supporting them to find medicine to come to terms or find peace in their relationship with their birth story. So that's been really meaningful, and I am really excited to be offering that process soon.
And it's worth really highlighting, because this work is, I think when we have this discussion and talk about birth and whatnot, I guess it always sort of seems to land as if we're talking about women who are having birth the first time, but this is equally as relevant to women that have had birth, or given birth already, and they're coming back for it again, and maybe they're looking to have a completely different experience.
Absolutely, yes. And I think so often women have pushed aside a difficult birth experience and just can't deal with it because of the strong, intense emotions that it brings up, and then they find themselves pregnant again. And that's really when they realize I need to deal with this. I need to address this. I need to acknowledge this. I need to find a way to come to terms with the experience and see what gifts are there for me, so that I can, or that she can probably not repeat that experience, because she's no doubt not wanting to have that experience again. So it's a really ripe area, and an area I'm really excited to be diving into. And I guess, like, really personally, I'm on an opening to conceive journey. We're in my own little inner family dynamic here. So that's been really interesting to see that unfolding, and to see, more layers of healing and revealing being explored and excavated, and just new layers of also surrendering my own expectations about the timeline for this conception to take place. So there's a lot of juice in that for me right now. So that's been interesting, and it's brought a lot of ripe conversations into my relationship with my partner too, which is nice.
Oh, it's only going to be even more powerful as well for influencing the work that you do, going through that yourself.
I feel like I'm going through yet another initiation. Like with Louis's birth, it was, the traumatic birth. That was an initiation. Then I had a pregnancy loss or early birth at 12 weeks, 2 years after his birth, which felt like another initiation into that. And now I'm like, oh, okay, I'm being initiated into this conception journey, because it's just, it's not happening the way it happened with my prior two conceptions. It's it's been challenging, and there's definitely peeling off of the layers. So it feels powerful, and like it will inform my work in some way, as it all seems to.
And so what would you say would be, and maybe in light of all you've just shared, what would be your daily non-negotiable?
Right now, it's a really short 3-minute Kundalini Kriya. That's just my non-negotiable daily at the moment. And if I can get at least 10 minutes on my yoga mat, that's like a big boon as well. If it's longer, that's awesome. And that sometimes happens, 20 minutes, half an hour even, maybe even a full class. That's like feels luxurious. But 10 minutes, that just feels really nourishing right now every day, with that 3 minutes of breathing and sitting intentionally. And getting to bed at a reasonable hour. I'm not great at that, but gosh, it makes such a huge difference getting a good night's sleep.
Mm-hmm.
It really just sets the tone.
Yeah, it's the simple things in life that make all the difference.
Yeah, sleep hygiene.
Yeah,
Such a big thing to prioritize, and one that it's easy to let that slip away, but when I do prioritize it, everything runs smoother in life.
I know it's been a wild year, and you've taken some stuff online, but for those listening, what have you got coming up? How can they work with you? Yeah, what's happening?
Right now I'm doing some conscious conception online circles. So that's available. I am offering mentoring in person if you're in the Newcastle area, or online. And my preference for that is like a bulk of sessions. You know, working with people over a period of time, I feel, is far more meaningful than one-off sessions. And I tend to attract women who are willing to invest and do that for themselves, and they really get that that's where the value is in committing to a journey and to going deep with that. So I'm really lit up by doing that work with women prenatally, whether or not they're choosing to have the support at their birth or otherwise. Right now, most of the women I'm working with are just doing that prenatal mentoring, so that's nice. And I do offer postpartum support as well. I have 2 packages, the Sacred Window and the Golden Month. So really just honouring those postpartum traditions that focus on rest and nutrition and, wise woman support, loving touch, the 5 universal postpartum needs of every woman, basically. I've got my yoga course online, so that's always there. And in the pipeline, so it'll be sometime 2021, I'll be offering some village prenatal style education / circle, spiritual, sacred connection to the work of preparing for birth. So it'll be a group of women. It'll be mostly online. If a lot of the women do happen to be local, I would also love to do some in-person stuff attached to that. It's likely to be run over probably like an 8-week period. And rather than just doing that one-on-one work, it's going to be facilitating that group prenatal preparation. And I think we can gain so much from sitting in circle with other women and seeing ourselves reflected in one another's experiences and being mirrors for one another. There's real potency in that. And I think that's really missing for many pregnant women. We're so segregated, in our nuclear families, in our separate homes, and that community connection, that village sort of vibe is what's missing. So really wanting to inject some of that into my mentoring and do this group sort of setting as well next year. So keep an eye out for that, because that's the new thing on the horizon, which is exciting.
The yoga that you put online this year, that's prenatal specifically, yeah?
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, and at the end of the day, when I look back and reflect on my experience, I knew intuitively, I knew that obviously preparing for birth was really important, but I kind of was a little ignorant about how much I really needed support postpartum. And because I did want to follow those traditions, which I know that you really love to emphasize in terms of how you support women, staying at home and the deep rest and, really anchoring with very traditional ways. But I personally didn't have a doula, and I look back and think, oh man, I totally should have had you by my side. I really don't think people realize the immense value of your work until they're in the thick of it. They're like, because things went pretty smoothly for us, comparatively speaking, but still, it would have been absolutely invaluable to have that person.
I think it's, such a common story for first-time mothers, sort of, I guess, overlooking the importance or not fully understanding, even though you said you were aware of those traditions and that was your plan, we don't really fathom the enormity of the shift that's just happened within ourselves and the impact that, this little presence moving from womb to world is going to have on our lives and our energy. And so it's easy for first-time mothers to not place as much emphasis on that as, you know, in hindsight they would have hoped to, and in terms of calling in the support and things. And yeah, it's a lot of the time it is second time mothers who realize, oh my gosh, I need to have some more structure of support in place for myself next time around, especially because they've already got the other child as well, who's usually pretty young. So yeah, but I think there is a little bit of a shift happening too with first-time mothers becoming more cognizant of the importance of really setting up this time in a very intentional way and crafting, you know, curating that support well ahead of time, because it's kind of too late once you're in it, right? It's really hard to like catch up and try and get the support online once you're in the throes of breastfeeding and mothering and learning your baby and integrating the enormity of birth and this identity shift from maiden to mother. There's so much happening. So to be able to curate that from the start, that's just incredible when women get that and know that is really important. You know, like first 40 days for the next 40 years. My gosh, that's powerful. There's, you know,
that's a whole conversation all on its own, really, you know.
I know, yes.
But yeah, you know, and I think it's when you're in that postnatal, thick of the postnatal period, it's one day, one breath at a time. And I can't even, like, again, looking back, fathom that I would have had the strength to make a decision and call in a support or a doula at that time. Be like, well, who and where and how much and what are they doing? Like, there's just no way, you know, it's,
No way.
No way. So preparation is everything, you know, and going beyond the stereotypical preparations for birth, for sure.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So can you tell us the best place to send the listener, so your website and social media, wherever you'd like to direct them?
Yeah, so my website is womancraftway.com, and I'm on Instagram, same handle, womancraftway. And I think you can also search my name, Clancy Allen, on Instagram, and it should also come up. And they're probably the two places that I am sharing. You can jump onto my newsletter list and hear from me that way.
Yeah, your Instagram account is awesome. There's always so much
goodness
on there. Yeah. And I love how just no fluff, just straight to the point you are with everything that you share. And it's good because it's that wake up call I think that we all need. And it's a really important thing to realize how disempowered we have all been as women for so long. And it's like our real duty and responsibility to rise up above that conditioning. And it's just like, it's not about us. It's not selfish. It's for future generations too. And as mothers, it's for our kids, whether we have boys or girls. Like, it's just profound impact for children to see, you know, how women, I guess, are conditioned or programmed or not around the process of birthing. And, you know.
Yeah, Michelle Odont, the French obstetrician, has said that we will forget how to birth. And I think that's probably already happening because of all the intervention and interference and use of synthetic hormones. Our bodies will forget what to do. So, it's like this is a revolution to reclaim that and to remember that birth belongs to women. Like, we own birth. So it's a call to come back to that and reclaim that. Yeah,
1,000%. Well, thank you so much for being part of the dialogue and for being brave and courageous enough to share this work, because it's so imperative. It's so important. So I'm really grateful for your time, and it's always the best to chat with you, and hopefully in person sometime soon. But thank you for your wisdom and your work in the world. I'm really appreciative.
Likewise. Thanks for having me.
If this episode was of value to you and your life, please subscribe. And if you can think of someone who would benefit from this dialogue, please do them a favor and send it their way. If you feel called, hop on over to iTunes and leave a 5-star review. This is the best way to get these conversations into the ears and hearts of our wider community, to those who need it most. You can find me at amyelandry.com or over on Instagram at amyelandry. May we all move a little closer to a life living in alignment.